What's poppin', my vampire hunters? It is me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. This is about to be a breakdown for Blade Trinity, one of the most, disliked Blade movies of the trilogy. Some would say it's the most disliked movie of the Blade trilogy. But who would say that? What are you talking about? But no, for real, I personally think that this movie isn't all that bad. Yes, it's pretty cringy, but it's not terrible. It's for 2004. I don't know. But anyway, let's just get into it. And pretty much right away, Blade Trinity makes history by being the first movie in the Blade franchise to feature the Marvel page-flipping animation at the start, acknowledging Blade's Marvel Comics roots. Then the movie starts off with the House of Talos arriving at the Syrian desert by helicopter to visit the tomb of Dracula, which is ironic considering that Blade made his first appearance in Marvel's Tomb of Dracula number 10 in 1973, and in that issue, Blade would of course go head-to-head with Dracula himself. This team from the House of Talos that descends into the tomb include Danica Talos, played by actress Parker Posey, her brother Asher Talos, played by Calum Keith Rennie, Jarko Grimwood, played by the legendary wrestler Triple H, and a vampire named Wolf, played by Paul Anthony. And as the team of vampires arrive, one of them takes the time to flip off the sun, deeply hurting the sun's feelings. Originally, the script had Dracula's tomb in Iraq instead of Syria, but they were kind of forced to change the location to Syria due to the very small likelihood of those helicopters landing at this tomb without first getting blown out of the sky by Iraqi or American anti-craft air missiles at the time. Within Dracula's tomb are inscriptions of ancient cuneiform, a language used by the Sumerians of old, and one of the earliest forms of written language that humanity knows of. Later on, we learn that Dracula, aka Drake in this movie, was born somewhere around the 5th or 4th millennium BCE, making Drake around 6,000 to 7,000 years old by the time of this movie. And because Drake is a growing 7,000-year-old boy, he decides to chomp the head off of Wolf the vampire before revealing his creepy-ass monster form to Danica and the rest of her group. After this, the movie then brings us to the streets of a vague city that the movie never really tells us the name of, but I'm pretty sure we're supposed to assume that this is like New York or something. However, we do know that this movie was filmed primarily in Canada, in Vancouver, British Columbia. Then Blade starts this very mediocre movie off with a bang by blowing up some C4 at a vampire hideout. And as those vampires try to make their escape from the Daywalker, Blade whips out his trusty Heckler & Koch USB match pistols that we saw him use in the movie's prequel Blade 2 to dispose of some blood-sucking suckers. This is before he pulls out his new chain saber knife that Whistler built for him that allows him to throw and retract his knife with ease. And seeing their vampire homies get turned to ash by Wesley Snipes, the remaining vampires grab some of their wheels and try to book it. But they forget that Blade is still whipping his very same modded 1968 Dodge Charger that has popped up in all 3 Blade films. So those dusty ass bitches don't get far before their asses get dusted. But unfortunately for Blade, the man is just too damn good at his job and accidentally kills a human familiar teaming up with Blade's enemy vampires, causing Blade to be wanted for murder and framed as a maniac murderer on the loose by the news. Mostly because Danica was nearby filming the whole thing on her big-ass camera before uploading the footage on her old-ass iMac computer. Lots of Apple product placement in this movie, actually. As later we would see Jessica Biel's Abigail use iTunes to make a vampire-killing playlist on her laptop. And pretty much all the computers in the Night Stalker's lair are iMacs. But anyways, after evading the police, Blade then heads back to his headquarters to meet up with his soon-to-be-slain mentor Whistler, who Blade thanks for his new chain saber knife. Whistler then chastises Blade for goofing up and killing a normie and warns him of potential consequences to come. And those consequences were brewing hardcore over at the FBI regional headquarters. On Blade's wanted flyer, we can see that Blade is listed as being 5'8" and 175 pounds, with his date and place of birth being completely unknown by the FBI. Then, as FBI agent Ray Cumberland watches a news story on Blade's confrontation with the police, we learn that Blade would go on to kill at least 3 other people during his attempt to escape after killing that familiar. After this, the movie brings us to the Talos family, where we see Danica, Jarko, and a new female vampire named Virago do a dramatic slow walk to Drake's feeding chambers. And as they watch Drake feed from their infrared monitors, you can see that Drake's victim has considerably less warmth on their bodies, due to them having the blood sucked out of them by a giant vampire monster.
that'll happen to you. A vampire monster who spends most of their time as actor Dominic Purcell to save money and effort on applying the costume on Dominic every time. Then, after Danica tells Draco the only other daywalker on the planet, and he agrees to kill that daywalker for them, we're brought to the streets of the unnamed city of Earth 26320, where Whistler is picking himself out an issue of the Weekly World Bulletin tabloid, where gun-toting psychopath captured on film is the main headline, accompanied by a photograph and FBI drawing of Blade. And at the top of the page here, we can see the text, "Bayou Alligator eats entire family, no one spared, not even family dog," which is kind of crazy and very unfortunate. But part of me wonders if the Weekly World Bulletin of this universe is actually owned by vampires, and that stories like these are actually ways of vampires trying to cover their tracks. But underneath the issue that Whistler actually picks up is another Weekly World Bulletin headline that says, "Late news flash, Mafia plans to colonize Mars." And while that is quite baffling, it sort of makes sense considering that Mars is the spiciest meatball of them all. So of course, the Mafia wants in on that. And next to the Weekly World Bulletin magazines are the New Grave magazines, which was a very popular gothic magazine at the time. But little does Whistler know that the magazine vendor was actually a government spy working with the FBI, plotting his demise. A spy that was also the movie's director of photography, Gabriel Beristain. Then we are brought to a talk show hosted by a Bentley Tittle, a character apparently named so as a nod to American horror writer Bentley Little, who wrote such works as The Revelation, The Summoning, and The Haunted. Tittle. What a funny name. Tittle interviews Police Chief Martin Vreed, played by Mark Berry, who would go on to play U.S. Navy Admiral Jones in Season 1 of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And alongside Chief Vreed is Edgar Vance, a forensic psychiatrist played by John Michael Higgins. And as Blade watches those three men bash him on TV, Whistler comes in to tell Blade that he can't do all this blading alone himself anymore, because he's no longer fighting just the vampires. Meanwhile, a gang of vampires headed by a vampire named Flick follow a lady and her baby down to the subway, referring to them as a combo meal. But unfortunately for them, their human Happy Meal would turn into a crappy meal, as that lady was actually Whistler's secret daughter born out of wedlock, Jessica Biel from Seventh Heaven. I mean, Abigail Whistler, yay! Who's also a vampire hunter with high-tech gadgets, just like her daddy, who would use her fancy UV laser arc bow in combination with a fake baby to send those skateboarding vampire hooligans to an early Tony Hawk Pro Skater tomb. Later on in the movie, when Abigail Whistler is discussing the specs of her laser bow, she says that the bow burns half as hot as the sun. And since the sun does burn at a whopping 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, then that bow's temperature is around 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or 2,760 degrees Celsius, which is around the same temperature as a welding arc. So her holding that bow so close to her exposed skin is kind of extremely dangerous, and she should probably not do that. Actually, fun fact about Abigail Whistler's character, when David S. Goyer was writing the script for this movie, he originally envisioned her character as the Marvel character Rachel Van Helsing, who made her first appearance in 1972's Tomb of Dracula No. 3 as the great-granddaughter of the vampire hunter Abraham Van Helsing, famed arch-nemesis of Dracula himself. However, because there was a Van Helsing movie already in development at that time starring Hugh Jackman, Goyer decided against adapting Rachel Van Helsing in this movie altogether, electing to morph the character into the daughter of Abraham Whistler instead, which is kind of sort of the same, considering that Abraham Whistler was based off of Abraham Van Helsing. Then the scene transitions to Whistler rubbing his wedding ring, thinking of all the family that he's lost during his tragic history with vampires, right before the US government comes knocking on their doorstep, just like Whistler was worried about. The overwhelming number of government agents ends up being too much for both Blade and Whistler, leading a fatally wounded Whistler to blowing up their headquarters with himself inside, in large part to keep the government and the vampires embedded in the government from getting access to his sensitive intel. Blade is then brought in by the FBI for questioning, where he reveals that he's killed a grand total of 1,182 wannabe vampire familiars, which I thought was interesting because Blade knowing the exact number of all the human beings that he's killed shows that Blade actually cares about the human casualties in his war against vampires. Interrupting the FBI's interrogation is forensic psychiatrist Edgar Vance, who goes on to ask Blade about his mother and whether or not they were very close, a pointed inquiry that triggers Blade's anger, which makes sense considering that in the first Blade movie, Blade was really uncomfortably close with his mother when they were reunited. Like, it straight up looked like she was going to make out with him at one point, which definitely would have traumatized me as well. Then Edgar reveals that he's been a vampire familiar for 5 years before sedating Blade and sending in Danica and her goons. Danica then asks Blade if Blade's tattoos mean anything, and even though Blade doesn't answer her, his tattoos do actually carry meaning, as it has been revealed in the past that Blade usually gets new tattoos to commemorate a particularly memorable vampire slaying adventure. But before long, in comes Hannibal King, I guess, to save the day. Hannibal King made his first debut in Tomb of Dracula number 25 from 1974. Originally a PI from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Hannibal King would have his life turned upside down when he got his ass bit by Deacon Frost, the very same vampire that was responsible for Blade's daywalker vampire DNA after biting Blade's mother while she was pregnant with Blade. However, in the Blade Trinity universe, we would find out that Hannibal was turned into a vampire by Danica Talos instead, and then turned back into a human thanks to a cure developed by Summerfield. But anyways, after getting bit and becoming a vampire himself, comic book Hannibal King would swear to never drink blood from a living human being and started a career as a vampire detective, eventually meeting Blade in 1972's Tomb of Dracula number 44 and fighting each other in issue 45. Eventually, Hannibal King and Blade would stop punching each other and team up to form the Night Stalkers in 1992's Night Stalkers number 1, alongside a descendant of Dracula's named Frank Drake, with the team's main objective being the annihilation of Dracula himself. And the Night Stalkers would of course eventually become the precursor team to the group of Dark Defenders that would become the Midnight Suns, with the Night Stalkers all becoming part-time members of that group. But in the Blade Trinity universe, we would quickly learn that their team of Night Stalkers look a lot different. Alongside Abigail Whistler and Hannibal King, we have Dex, played by Ron Selmore, who picks Hannibal and Abigail up after their successful rescue of Blade. Then we have Hedges, played by comedian Patton Oswalt, who would of course go on to play Eric, Billy, Sam, Thurston, and Ernest Koenig in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., as well as Pip the Troll in 2021's Eternals, that also featured Blade, but Mahershala Ali's Blade, but also providing the voice of MODOK in the MODOK TV show. Then we have Summerfield, played by Natasha Lyonne, as well as Summerfield's daughter, Zoe Summerfield, played by Haley Page. And pretty much immediately after meeting this team, Blade roasts the hell out of them, telling them that they look like rejects from a Saturday morning cartoon, which is ironic considering that Blade and Whistler made cameos in the Spider-Man animated series in the 90s. And this is before Blade asks them if they think vampire hunting is a sitcom, before the movie immediately and hilariously cuts to both Abigail and Hedge, played by two actors who were famous for starring in sitcoms, Beale on Seventh Heaven and Oswalt on King of Queens. And not long after this, Hannibal brings Blade to his computer to pull out footage of Danica and her homies from the camera attached to his gun. And as he's doing so, you can see that Hannibal has been collecting footage of his vampire slaying into various volumes, with Kicking Ass Volume 2 being seen next to his computer mouse. And speaking of kicking ass, Ryan Reynolds kicked his own ass in the gym in preparation for this role and gained a whole ass 25 pounds of pure muscle, which is insane. Then Ryan Reynolds would do his first ever fourth wall break in a Marvel movie when he whips out a copy of Tomb of Dracula number 55 from 1977, the same series that all of these characters basically made their first appearance in. This would be the first and last time a Marvel comic would make an appearance in a Marvel Comics project until we saw some X-Men comics in 2017's Logan and a variety of Marvel comics in a lawyer's office in 2022's She-Hulk episode 2. And while giving Blade the lowdown on Dracula, Hannibal calls Dracula the original perfect vampire and the patriarch of Hominis Nocturna, which is the Latin name for the entire vampire species of this universe. Then we see Drake himself walk into a gothic vampire shop where the cashier is eating himself a bowl of Count Chocula that he took right off of the shelf. And as another employee shows Dracula around the store, she points out their Drakidula lunchboxes. And we actually see a Drakidula decal on one of the vampire's motorcycles right before Blade makes his explosive entrance at the beginning of this movie. But then of course, Dracula would throw the Count Chocula goth out the window before sucking the female employee's blood. Moving back over to the Night Stalkers, as Hannibal King laments about how screwed they are, Summerfield reveals the Night Stalkers' secret ace in the hole, the Daystar virus meant to wipe out all the vampires the virus comes in contact with. Summerfield named it Daystar due to Daystar just being another fancy poetic word for the sun. The Night Stalkers theorized that if they can just get at some of Daddy Dracula's blood, they can use his DNA to make a perfect anti-vampire virus that can eliminate the vampire threat once and for all. And while Summerfield is giving her presentation, her daughter Zoe can be seen coloring a picture of a vampire in the corner. Then the team head on over to Patton Oswalt's Hedges to get geared up. And before I forget, when Blade meets Hedges for the first time, Hedges is actually wearing a big old number 4 on his shirt, a reference to Marvel's Fantastic Four. But anyways, while chatting about their variety of weapons, Hedges whips out this triple-barreled shotgun, which is basically just a modded Winchester 1887. But it's a shotgun that would later be reused in other TV productions like Stargate Atlantis, Eureka, and Altered Carbon. And while the Night Stalkers discuss Drake's potential powers, Hedges mentions that Dracula can shapeshift into humans, but not anything like a bat or a wolf. But speaking of vampires and wolves, apparently after releasing Blade Trinity, New Line Cinema was planning on expanding the Blade universe with a massive crossover with the Underworld Vampires vs. Werewolves film franchise, a fact that Underworld star Kate Beckinsale revealed herself in the past. But the idea was ultimately scrapped when Marvel Studios got the rights back to Blade in 2012. And hey, while we're on the subject of scrapped ideas, while writing this film, one of the first ideas that David Goyer had before he decided against it was to set Blade Trinity in a post-apocalyptic future where vampires finally took over the world. But because the story was a little bit too bleak even for a Blade movie, Goyer decided against it. But honestly, I feel like this is kind of a baller idea that Marvel Studios should consider following up on for an Old Man Logan type of scenario for Wesley Snipes' Blade. It would be a pretty great way to send him off, just like Fox intended to do with Wolverine and Logan. But that's just me. But at any rate, unfortunately, the script that Goyer ended up writing and producing into Blade Trinity would end up being received poorly by general audiences, leading writer and director David Goyer to experience a deep depression following this negative reaction to his film. But one of the biggest reasons why Goyer would go on to call Blade Trinity the worst experience of his career is due to the drama that both he and Blade actor Wesley Snipes underwent during the shooting process. Apparently, there came a point where Snipes straight up refused to talk to David Goyer altogether, communicating with him only through post-it notes. And at the end of every post-it note message, Snipes would sign those messages off with Blade at the end, because Wesley Snipes went full method acting during this production. Dude literally did not respond to anyone that did not call him Blade specifically, choosing to stay in character at all times while simultaneously smoking a ton of the devil's lettuce inside of his trailer. And honestly, I would probably be drowning myself in the wacky tobacco too if I was in Wesley Snipes' shoes during the time of shooting Blade Trinity, because according to Goyer, Wesley Snipes' tax issues with the IRS started to begin right when this production began, causing Wesley Snipes to become just naturally more irritated on set because of all that, because all of this dude's money was essentially frozen at the time. And according to Patton Oswalt, even though the movie didn't come out as amazing as they all wanted, the fact that it even was made at all was a triumph due to all the chaos and drama behind the scenes. Drama that would ultimately lead Wesley Snipes to sue David S. Goyer and the folks at New Line Cinema due to feeling like he wasn't allowed to fully enact his role as one of the producers of the movie, while also lamenting his reduced presence in the film due to having to share the spotlight with 2 other central characters. Though I'm pretty sure Goyer would have dodged this lawsuit if one of the 2 previous Blade directors directed this film instead. However, Blade 1 director Stephen Norrington would pass on the chance to direct Blade Trinity after not being a huge fan of Goyer's script, and Blade 2 director Guillermo del Toro was too damn busy adapting one of his favorite comic book characters, Hellboy, for the big screen in 2004. But anyways, as the Night Stalkers get ready for a day of hunting, Abby has got to get her murder music ready on her iTunes, where we can see some of her favorite artists include Fluke, Jurassic 5, ATFC, Underworld, Dave Ralph, Silencer, Red Snapper, Mike Wells, Uncle, DJ Crush, DJ Shadow, and Kruder and Dorfmeister. What the hell is a Dorfmeister? I don't know. And after Blade interrogates a familiar by dangling them upside down Batman style, they are led to the doorsteps of Edgar Vance's Vance Institute. And while on the way there, Hannibal jokes that Blade should try blinking once in a while, a line improvised by Ryan Reynolds in typical Ryan Reynolds fashion. But speaking of Hannibal, as the gang dispose of Vance's security, you can see what looks like a Captain America shield on Hannibal's back. But since the design doesn't exactly match, it could honestly just be a bullseye. But then the Night Stalkers quickly discover that Edgar had gotten his blood slurped out by Drake, who demands to Blade to show him what he's made of, before, immediately running away from Blade like a baby back bitch. Like, how are you gonna act all tough and then immediately run away? And not only that, this dude then uses a human baby as a distraction to get away. Like, this is probably one of the lamest first interactions a hero and a villain have ever had in a comic book movie, in my opinion. I'm not sure what the hell David Goyer was thinking here. But anyways, when the gang get back to their headquarters, Abby gets naked in the shower after having a flashback to Whistler's story that Whistler told Blade about his family in Blade 1, which is weird because Abby was not there for that story, so why did that even happen? Why does she have those memories? But also, speaking of a naked Abby, the script originally had Abby and Blade engaging in a sexy time scene at one point during the movie, but they never actually ended up filming that scene at the end of the day. And when Blade and Abby go to catch up with an injured Hannibal, Hannibal can be seen watching William Shatner in 1966's Incubus, a movie where a man battles dark demons. Hannibal then asks Blade what Blade plans to do if the Night Stalkers are successful at wiping out all the vampires in the world, a question that Blade chooses not to answer. And while we might never know the answer to this question, we do know that the original screenplay ended with Blade's vampirism being completely cured by the Daystar virus, causing Blade to throw his sword off of a cliff into the sea before dramatically walking off into the forest as a fully human man for the first time in his life. But Goyer would decide against this ending, instead giving us the first ever post-credit scene in a Marvel Comics production where we see Blade cruising in his Dodge Charger off to slay more vampires. Then later, when Summerfield discovers that the vampires are working out of a company called Biomedica, she pulls up their address at 529 Waterfront Drive, USA 1002, leaving the city out completely. I am not sure why this movie just flat out refused to name the city that it takes place in, but hey, at least we know they're in the US of A, America. The group then confront both Virago and Vreed at one of the vampire's human blood farms, a concept that Goyer apparently recycled from one of the deleted scenes from the first Blade movie that showed Deacon Frost preparing for a world of vampires by storing human beings in a similar fashion. But while the two were away, Drake would come to play, ending the lives of Dex, Hedges, and Summerfield, and kidnapping Summerfield's underage daughter in typical Drake fashion, because Drake is simply not like us. And before he left, Drake would steal bars straight from Ralph Waldo Emerson's mouth by writing the words "Immortality will come to such as are fit for it" in blood on a plastic curtain. Abby would then focus her anger towards Drake into her archery training as the group prepared to rescue Hannibal after he was also kidnapped by Drake. And during the sequence, actress Jessica Biel accidentally destroyed one of the film's $300,000 cameras with her baller-ass archery skills. But it wasn't her fault. She was specifically directed to aim for the camera, with the director not thinking that she would actually hit the camera from 50 feet away. Then a kidnapped Hannibal King is brought before Danica, Triple H, and all of their emo friends. And speaking of Triple H, Blade Trinity would be the wrestler's first role on a film, a role that was originally quite limited. However, New Line Cinema loved Triple H's performance so much that they decided to expand his character's role to give Triple H more time on screen, which is why we see him threatening Hannibal with one of their vampire Pomeranians. This would actually be the second time a Marvel movie would feature genetically altered dogs, as Ang Lee's Hulk movie in the previous year had the villain David Banner genetically alter his dogs as well. You guys can check out the breakdown I did on the 2003 Hulk movie right here. But soon, Blade and Abby come to Hannibal's rescue, with Hannibal eventually having to face off with Jarko as Blade fights Drake. And instead of using his vampire powers to easily overpower an unarmed human Hannibal, Jarko instead taps into his Triple H wrestling power set to unleash a Running Man power slam on not Deadpool's ass. But of course, Hannibal would eventually get the best of this dumbass brute of a vampire. Moving on to Blade and Drake's final battle, the two end up clashing blades, with Dominic Purcell himself actually being the one executing the sword fighting choreography instead of a stunt double here. But of course, through the power of friendship, Blade ends up stabbing Drake with one of Abby's Daystar virus arrows, causing the virus to immediately become airborne, killing Danica and the rest of the vampires in the building. Respecting Blade's fighting ability, Dracula then offers Blade a final gift by shapeshifting into Blade to aid Blade's escape from the authorities, with humans then discovering firm existence of vampires when Drake's shapeshifting wears off in the morgue. And while this is the end of the movie, there was actually an alternate ending shot that was supposed to tease some type of Night Stalker spin-off project with both Abby and Hannibal. Taking place 6 months after Drake's death, the deleted ending saw the two of them bust into a casino in Shanghai to hunt down a vampire-werewolf hybrid, a move that could have blended well with New Line Cinema's plans to cross over with the Underworld movies. But what a spin-off project would have looked like following this ending, the world may never know.
But yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching this breakdown of Blade Trinity. You guys are amazing for taking the time to watch this. If you guys want to hear me ramble some more, you guys can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube, and subscribe and hit that notification bell to get notifications for every time we upload a video. And if you want even more Heavy Spoilers in your life, hit up the Heavy Spoiler store to pick up some of our merch. We got some really great merch for you guys, and you guys will not be disappointed. But at any rate, you guys are amazing for watching this video, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.